The carriage rattled along the winding country road, jostling its lone passenger with each bump and turn. Augusta Blackwell clutched her worn leather satchel tightly against her chest, her dark eyes fixed on the passing landscape of rolling English hills shrouded in the misty embrace of early spring. The year was 1851, and at 23 Augusta found herself travelling toward an uncertain future at Blackwood Manor, the ancestral home of the formidable Duke of Westmoreland. "Not much farther now, miss," called the driver over his shoulder. "Blackwood Manor lies just beyond that ridge." Augusta nodded silently, swallowing the knot of apprehension that had settled in her throat. The position of governess to the Duke's 5 children had come unexpectedly, a blessing from Providence, when her previous situation had ended abruptly with the family's financial ruin. The salary offered was generous, suspiciously so, and the letter of employment had been terse, almost desperate in tone. As the carriage crested the hill, Augusta caught her first glimpse of Blackwood Manor. The imposing stone structure rose from the landscape like a sentinel, its Gothic spires piercing the grey sky. Though grand in its architecture, there was something forlorn about the estate. The gardens appeared neglected, and several windows remained shuttered despite the hour. "They say the Duke hasn't been the same since the Duchess passed," the driver remarked, noticing Augusta's wide-eyed appraisal. "3 winters ago now, terrible business, childbirth, the little one survived, but her Grace did not." Augusta's heart constricted. 5 children without a mother, and by all accounts with a father present only in name. "How old are the children?" she asked. "The eldest, Master James, must be 12 now. Then the twins, 10 perhaps. Miss Catherine must be 7, and the little one, the babe that cost the Duchess her life, she's 3 now, I believe. Haven't seen much of them myself. The Duke keeps them hidden away like treasures he can't bear to look upon." The carriage pulled to a stop before the grand entrance. Augusta smoothed her simple black dress, adjusted her bonnet, and descended with as much dignity as her trembling legs would allow. Before she could reach for her single trunk, the massive oak doors swung open. A severe-looking woman emerged, her grey hair pulled into a tight bun, her posture rigid as iron. "Miss Blackwell, I presume. I am Mrs. Wilson, the housekeeper of Blackwood Manor. You are expected." Her tone suggested Augusta was an inconvenience rather than a welcome addition. "Thank you for receiving me," Augusta replied, refusing to be cowed. "I look forward to meeting my charges." Mrs. Wilson's thin lips pressed together. "His Grace is currently away on business in London. You will meet him upon his return next week. In the meantime, you shall become acquainted with the children and your duties." As Augusta followed the housekeeper through the cavernous entrance hall, she noted the conspicuous absence of warmth. Richly furnished with ancestral portraits and priceless antiques, Blackwood Manor felt more like a museum than a home. The air itself seemed heavy with unspoken sorrow. "The children take their meals in the nursery, Mrs. Wilson explained as they ascended the grand staircase. "You will join them there. The Duke dines alone when in residence." Her voice lowered. "Miss Blackwell, I feel I must warn you. The previous 4 governesses lasted less than 6 months each. The children have been difficult since their mother's passing." Augusta raised her chin. "I am not easily discouraged, Mrs. Wilson." The housekeeper's expression remained doubtful. "The East Wing is reserved for the family and staff. The West Wing, including His Grace's study and chambers, is strictly forbidden without explicit invitation." She paused before a door. "This will be your room. The nursery is at the end of the corridor. The children are there now with their nurse, Mrs. Pembroke, who cares for the youngest, Miss Eleanor." Augusta's chamber was modest but comfortable, with a small fireplace, a narrow bed, and a writing desk positioned beneath a window overlooking the neglected rose garden. After freshening up, she steeled herself for the meeting that would determine the course of her new life. The nursery door stood slightly ajar when Augusta approached. From within came the sound of a child's frustrated cry and a harried adult voice attempting to restore order. Augusta knocked gently before entering. The scene that greeted her was one of barely contained chaos. Books and toys lay scattered across the floor. A boy of about 10 was engaged in what appeared to be a fencing match with a fireplace poker, while his identical twin brother cheered him on. A serious-looking older boy sat in the window seat, seemingly determined to ignore the pandemonium around him. In a corner, a young girl with honey-colored curls was methodically cutting paper dolls from what appeared to be pages torn from a book. Only the nursemaid, a plump, exhausted-looking woman cradling a sleepy toddler, noticed Augusta's entrance. "Heavens! You must be the new governess," she exclaimed, rising with difficulty. "I'm Mrs. Pembroke. This is little Eleanor." The woman looked at Augusta with undisguised relief. "Children, children! Your new governess has arrived." The activity in the room ground to a halt as 4 pairs of eyes turned to assess the newcomer. Augusta recognized the critical appraisal in their gaze. She was being measured, evaluated for weaknesses they could exploit. Augusta stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her. "Good afternoon," she said with quiet authority. "I am Miss Augusta Blackwell, and I have the privilege of being your new governess." The eldest boy, James, approached her with deliberate slowness. Auburn-haired like his siblings, with his father's reported aristocratic features, he carried himself with the premature gravity of a child forced too early into responsibility. "How long do you intend to stay, Miss Blackwell?" he asked bluntly. "Miss Hayes lasted 4 months, Miss Richardson barely 3. Augusta met his challenging gaze steadily. "I intend to stay as long as I am needed, Master James." "Father doesn't need anyone," the boy replied coldly. "And neither do we." One of the twins snorted. "Speak for yourself, James. I, for one, would welcome someone who can actually teach something of interest." His accent was impeccably aristocratic, his vocabulary advanced for his age. "I'm Frederick," he continued with a mock bow. "The superior twin. That uncultured creature with the poker is my brother George." George brandished the poker defensively. "At least I don't hide behind books all day." The little girl looked up from her decimated book. "I'm Catherine. Are you going to make us recite French verbs?" Miss Richardson was obsessed with French verbs. It was dreadfully boring. Augusta took in each child, their defiance, their hurt, their longing poorly disguised as indifference. "I believe education should nurture curiosity, not suffocate it," she said. "We will certainly study French, mathematics, history, and literature as befits your stations, but we shall also explore music, art, and the natural sciences." "Father says art and music are frivolous pursuits," James interjected. Augusta raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Well, I find that curious, considering the magnificent pianoforte I noticed in the drawing room and the rather impressive collection of paintings adorning the gallery." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across James's face. The toddler in Mrs. Pembroke's arms squirmed to be put down. Once on her feet, little Eleanor toddled directly to Augusta and gazed up with solemn eyes so like her mother's, according to the locket Augusta had glimpsed hanging in the hallway. "Up," the child requested, raising her arms. The nursery fell silent. According to Mrs. Pembroke's widening eyes, this was unprecedented behavior from the normally shy child. Without hesitation, Augusta lifted Eleanor into her arms. The little girl immediately touched Augusta's dark curls with wonder, then settled comfortably against her shoulder. "Well," breathed Mrs. Pembroke, "I've never seen the like." Something in the atmosphere of the room shifted. The twins exchanged glances. Catherine abandoned her paper dolls, and even James's rigid posture softened infinitesimally. "Lessons will begin tomorrow after breakfast," Augusta announced, still holding Eleanor. "Tonight, perhaps you might acquaint me with your favorite books. I brought several of my own that I think you might enjoy." That evening, as Augusta unpacked her meager possessions, she gazed out at the moonlit grounds of Blackwood Manor. Somewhere in London, the mysterious Duke of Westhaven conducted his business, unaware that his children, these bright, wounded souls, had already begun to creep into her heart. Little did she know that in 1 week's time she would stand face to face with Alexander Cavendish, the man whose grief had transformed him into the most feared aristocrat in England, and whose icebound heart would soon be thawed by the unwavering warmth of a simple governess who refused to be intimidated by either his rank or his sorrow. Alexander Cavendish, the 7th Duke of Westhaven, was not a man accustomed to being challenged. As his carriage approached Blackwood Manor after a fortnight in London, his business having taken longer than anticipated, his thoughts were occupied with estate matters, parliamentary concerns, and the persistent headache that seemed his constant companion these past 3 years. The last thing he expected upon his return was laughter. Yet as he entered the grand foyer, divesting himself of his travelling coat and hat, the unmistakable sound of childish merriment floated down from the upper floors. Alexander froze, his hand suspended in the act of passing his gloves to the butler. "Hawkins," he said quietly. "What is that noise?" The elderly butler's face remained impassive, though something like satisfaction flickered in his eyes. "I believe that would be the children, Your Grace. They are with the new governess in the library." Alexander frowned. The library had been Caroline's favorite room. He had not set foot in it since her death. "The new governess," he repeated flatly. "Miss Blackwell, was it not? I intended to interview her upon my arrival." "Yes, Your Grace. Miss Blackwell arrived as scheduled last week." Without another word, Alexander strode toward the library, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the marble floor. The sound of laughter grew louder, punctuated by a woman's voice, melodious, warm, gently authoritative, recounting what appeared to be a story. He paused at the threshold, unobserved. The scene before him was so unexpected that for a moment he wondered if grief had finally unhinged his mind. His children, his solemn, withdrawn children, were gathered around a young woman seated in Caroline's favorite window alcove. Even James, who had retreated into cold silence these past years, sat cross-legged on the floor, his face animated as he had not seen since before Caroline's death. The twins were engaged in what appeared to be a friendly argument about some point in the story, while Catherine leaned against the woman's knee. Most astonishing of all, little Eleanor, who normally shied away from everyone save her nurse, sat contentedly in the woman's lap, playing with a lock of raven hair that had escaped its pins. The woman, Miss Blackwell, he presumed, was not what he had expected. His solicitor had engaged her based on her excellent references, but Alexander had anticipated someone older, more severe. This woman appeared scarcely more than 20, with a countenance that, while not conventionally beautiful, possessed a vivid expressiveness that transformed her features into something far more compelling. But why would the prince not simply tell the princess his true identity? Frederick was asking, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Pride," George interjected before Miss Blackwell could answer. "Obviously it was pride." "Not merely pride," Miss Blackwell corrected gently. "Fear, I think. Sometimes we build walls not to keep others out, but to see who cares enough to break them down." Alexander stiffened. The words struck too close to home, and he suddenly felt exposed, as though this stranger had glimpsed the carefully guarded chambers of his heart. He cleared his throat, and the effect was immediate. 5 heads turned in his direction, the children's expressions transforming from animation to wary reserve. Miss Blackwell alone remained composed, though he noted the slight widening of her dark eyes. "Father!" Catherine exclaimed, before remembering herself and dropping into a hasty curtsy. The boys scrambled to their feet, bowing awkwardly. "Your Grace," Miss Blackwell said, rising with Eleanor still in her arms. Her voice was steady, her gaze direct as she curtsied with remarkable grace despite the child's weight. "Welcome home. We did not expect you until tomorrow." "Evidently," Alexander replied coldly. "I find myself at a disadvantage, Miss Blackwell. You appear to have made yourself quite at home in my absence." A flash of something, indignation perhaps, crossed her features before she composed them again. "I apologize if we have disturbed you, Your Grace. We were concluding our literature lesson for the day. In my late wife's favorite room." A hush fell over the library. Even the children seemed to hold their breath. Miss Blackwell met his gaze unflinchingly. "Yes, Your Grace. The Duchess had excellent taste. This room houses not only the finest collection of books in the county, but also receives the best light for reading. I believe education should be conducted in pleasant surroundings whenever possible." Alexander was unaccustomed to being addressed in such a direct manner, particularly by an employee. Before he could formulate a suitably cutting response, Eleanor stretched her small arms toward him. "Papa," she said clearly, a word he had rarely heard from her lips. The simple word pierced him like a physical blow. For a terrible moment, he saw Caroline in the child's face, the same delicate features, the same trusting gaze that had once been turned upon him with love. "I have business to attend to," he said abruptly, ignoring his youngest daughter's outstretched arms. "Miss Blackwell, I expect a full report on the children's progress in my study after dinner. Children, continue with your lessons." With that, he turned on his heel and strode away, missing the look of quiet determination that settled on Augusta Blackwell's face. Dinner at Blackwood Manor was a solitary affair for the Duke. As was his custom, he dined alone in the cavernous formal dining room, surrounded by empty chairs and the watchful eyes of ancestral portraits. The silence, once a balm to his wounded spirit, now seemed oppressive after the unexpected sounds of life he had encountered earlier. Alexander pushed away his barely touched plate and reached for his wine glass. 3 years. 3 years since Caroline had been taken from him, leaving him with 5 children he could barely look at without seeing her face, without being reminded of his failure to protect her. A soft knock at the door interrupted his dark musings. "Enter," he called, expecting Hawkins with the port. Instead, Augusta Blackwell stood in the doorway, her posture straight, her expression composed. She had changed for dinner, he noted, into a gown of deep blue that, while simple, complemented her coloring. Her dark hair was arranged in a modest style that nonetheless revealed the elegant line of her neck. "You requested a report on the children's progress, Your Grace," she said, remaining at a respectful distance. Alexander gestured impatiently to a chair. "Sit, Miss Blackwell. I dislike conversing with someone hovering in doorways." She took the offered seat with quiet dignity, placing a leather-bound notebook on the table before her. "I have kept detailed records of each child's academic development, strengths and areas requiring additional attention." "And what have you discovered in a mere week that 4 previous governesses failed to discern?" he asked, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. Augusta Blackwell's chin lifted slightly. "That your children are extraordinary, Your Grace, though each in different ways. Master James has a remarkable mind for mathematics and strategy. He defeated me soundly at chess yesterday, a feat I assure you is not easily accomplished. The twins, while outwardly similar, possess distinctly different talents. Master Frederick has a gift for languages and literature, while Master George exhibits exceptional spatial reasoning and mechanical aptitude. Miss Catherine's artistic abilities are truly impressive for a child of her age, and even little Miss Eleanor shows signs of an unusually retentive memory." Despite himself, Alexander was intrigued. This assessment matched his own observations from before everything changed. "You seem to have formed these opinions rather quickly." "Children reveal themselves readily to those who truly see them, Your Grace," she replied quietly. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Alexander found himself uncharacteristically discomforted by this woman's direct gaze. Most people, even those of his own social standing, could not hold his eye for long, intimidated by his reputation or his rank. Miss Blackwell, however, regarded him with neither fear nor false deference, but with a clear-eyed assessment that suggested she saw beyond the ducal title to the man beneath. It was most unsettling. "I understand you've been using the library for lessons," he said abruptly. "That will cease immediately. The schoolroom is more than adequate." Something flashed in her eyes, disappointment, frustration, but her voice remained even. "As you wish, Your Grace. However, I believe the children benefit from the change in environment. Confinement to a single room day after day dulls the mind and spirit. The children's minds and spirits are not your concern, Miss Blackwell. Their education is. With respect, Your Grace, they cannot be separated. A child who withers emotionally cannot flourish intellectually." Alexander's hand tightened around his wine glass. "Are you suggesting my children are withering, Miss Blackwell?" She hesitated, and he could see her weighing her words carefully. "I believe your children are mourning, Your Grace, not only for their mother but for the father who withdrew from them when they needed him most." The words landed like a physical blow. Alexander rose from his chair, anger coursing through him. "You forget yourself, Miss Blackwell. You were hired to instruct my children in academics, not to psychoanalyze their relationship with me." Augusta remained seated, her gaze steady. "I was hired to care for your children's well-being, Your Grace. That extends beyond Latin declensions and mathematical equations. You have been in my household 1 week," he said coldly. "Do not presume to understand matters that began long before your arrival." "I understand grief, Your Grace." Her voice softened, and something in her expression, a shadow of old pain, caught him off guard. "I understand how it can consume us, convince us that by closing ourselves off from love, we might never again experience loss." Alexander turned away, unwilling to let her see how accurately her words had struck home. "That will be all, Miss Blackwell. Your children need you," she said quietly, rising from her seat. "Not the Duke of Westmoreland with his titles and responsibilities, but Alexander Cavendish, their father. I said that will be all." She gathered her notebook and moved toward the door, but paused on the threshold. The children have prepared a small musical performance for tomorrow afternoon. They have worked very hard this past week. It would mean the world to them if you would attend. Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving Alexander alone with thoughts more turbulent than they had been in years. Later that night, unable to sleep, Alexander found himself wandering the long corridors of Blackwood Manor. His restless steps carried him to the nursery wing, a part of the house he rarely visited, especially at night. Outside the children's rooms, he hesitated, then quietly opened the first door. The twins slept peacefully, George's arm flung dramatically across his pillow. Frederick curled neatly on his side with a book still clutched in his hand. Alexander gently removed the volume and placed it on the nightstand, an action so natural and yet so foreign that it made his chest ache. In Catherine's room, his artistic daughter had fallen asleep amid sketches and colored pencils. The drawing on top showed what appeared to be a family, tall figures and small, standing together beneath a tree. Alexander's throat tightened as he carefully gathered the art supplies and placed them on her desk. James, ever the light sleeper, opened his eyes as the door to his room creaked. "Father," he murmured, sitting up. "Go back to sleep, James," Alexander said softly. "I was just checking on you." The boy looked confused, as if this behavior was so unprecedented he could not process it. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong." Alexander hesitated, then awkwardly patted his son's shoulder. "Sleep well." In Eleanor's nursery, he found his youngest daughter sleeping soundly, her small face peaceful in repose. He stood watching her for a long moment, seeing Caroline in every delicate feature. The grief rose like a tide, threatening to pull him under. As he turned to leave, he noticed a figure in the adjoining room where Mrs. Pembroke usually slept. But it was not the nursemaid seated in the rocking chair with a book open on her lap. It was Miss Blackwell, apparently having taken on night duty to allow the exhausted nursemaid some rest. She looked up as he appeared in the doorway, surprise flickering across her features. "Your Grace, why are you here and not Mrs. Pembroke?" he asked, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Eleanor. "Mrs. Pembroke has been suffering from a headache. I offered to watch over Miss Eleanor tonight." She closed her book. "She sometimes has nightmares." Alexander frowned. "I was not informed of this." "Perhaps because you have not asked," she replied, the gentle tone taking the sting from her words. Their eyes met in the dim lamplight, and Alexander was struck again by the directness of her gaze. In that moment something passed between them, a recognition perhaps of two souls who understood loss, who had been shaped by it in different ways. "The musical performance," he said abruptly. "What time tomorrow?" A smile touched her lips, transforming her face in a way that made it difficult for him to look away. 4 o'clock in the music room, Your Grace." Alexander nodded curtly and retreated, unsettled by the strange comfort he had found in her presence, and by the unwelcome realization that Augusta Blackwell had, in the space of a week, begun to thaw the ice that had encased his heart for 3 long years. The music room at Blackwood Manor had remained largely unused since Caroline's death. A fine layer of dust covered the grand pianoforte, and the harp stood silent in the corner, its strings untouched by human hands for 3 long years. As Augusta supervised the twins' efforts to make the room presentable for the afternoon's performance, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the past pressing down on them all. "Father won't come," James stated flatly, as he half-heartedly polished a silver candelabra. "You're setting yourself up for disappointment, Miss Blackwell." Augusta continued arranging chairs, her movements purposeful. "Your father said he would attend, and I believe him to be a man of his word." "He says many things," James muttered, so quietly that Augusta barely caught the words. The boy's pain was palpable, a wound still raw despite the passing years. "James," Augusta said gently, setting aside her tasks to approach the eldest Cavendish child, "may I speak plainly with you?" The boy shrugged, his eyes downcast. "I believe your father loves you very deeply, so deeply, in fact, that he has found it difficult to face you all since your mother's passing. Sometimes, when people experience great loss, they withdraw, not from lack of love, but from an excess of it." James looked up sharply. "That makes no sense." "Grief rarely does," Augusta replied with a sad smile. "But I've observed how he watches you all when he thinks no one notices. There is longing there and regret. You've been here barely a fortnight, James challenged, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. How could you possibly know what father thinks or feels? Augusta considered this. I cannot claim to know your father's mind, James, but I recognize the look of someone who has locked away their heart for safekeeping and misplaced the key. I saw it often enough in my own mirror after I lost my parents. The revelation silenced the boy. In the 2 weeks since her arrival, Augusta had shared little of her personal history with the children, focusing instead on earning their trust through consistency and genuine interest in their lives. Both of them, James finally asked, his voice smaller than his 12 years. Augusta nodded. My father first in a carriage accident when I was 7, then my mother to pneumonia when I was 16. My brother and I were separated, he to apprentice with a solicitor, I to become a teacher's assistant at a girls' school. Understanding dawned in James's eyes, not pity which Augusta would have resented, but recognition of a shared experience. Is that why you became a governess? Because you had nowhere else to go? I became a governess because I discovered I had a gift for teaching, Augusta corrected gently. But yes, circumstances dictated my choices in ways they might not have otherwise. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Catherine and Eleanor, the latter toddling in with Mrs. Pembroke close behind. Catherine's honey-coloured curls had been neatly arranged, and she wore a pink dress that Augusta suspected had been her mother's favourite, given the care with which Mrs. Wilson had pressed it. Will father really come to hear us play? Catherine asked, her expression hovering between hope and doubt. I believe he will, Augusta replied, helping the little girl arrange her sheet music on the stand. And I think he will be very proud of how hard you've all worked. As the hour of the performance approached, Augusta felt her own nervousness growing. She had staked much on this event, not merely her credibility with the children, but a crucial step in her careful campaign to breach the walls Alexander Cavendish had built around himself. At precisely 4 o'clock, the doors to the music room opened, and the Duke of Westmoreland entered. His tall figure seemed to fill the doorway, his expression guarded as he surveyed the transformed space. The children immediately fell silent, their earlier excitement dampened by their father's imposing presence. Your Grace, Augusta greeted him with a curtsy. Thank you for joining us. The children have prepared several pieces for your enjoyment. Alexander nodded stiffly, taking the seat Augusta had positioned at the center of the small audience area. As he settled himself, Augusta noticed a flash of color against the austere black of his clothing. A small nosegay of spring flowers protruded from his coat pocket, clearly gathered with childish hands. Miss Eleanor insisted her father needed flowers, Mrs. Pembroke whispered, following Augusta's gaze. She gathered them from the kitchen garden this morning. Something warm unfurled in Augusta's chest at this small evidence of the bond that still existed between father and children, despite the emotional distance of recent years. The performance began with Frederick at the pianoforte, his slender fingers moving confidently across the keys in a simple but well-executed minuet. George followed with a surprisingly tender rendition of a folk song on the violin, an instrument Augusta had discovered gathering dust in a cabinet and had promptly had restrung. Catherine, nervous but determined, performed a sweet melody on the pianoforte that Augusta had simplified for her still developing skills. James had initially refused to participate, but at the last moment stepped forward with a piece of paper in his hand. I have not prepared a musical piece, he announced formally, glancing anxiously at his father. Instead, I have written a poem. It is called Remembrance. Augusta held her breath as the boy began to recite, his young voice gathering strength with each line of what proved to be a poignant tribute to his mother. As James spoke the final verse, Augusta dared to look at Alexander. The Duke sat rigidly, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, his face a mask of control that nevertheless failed to conceal the emotion in his eyes. When James finished, silence filled the room. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Alexander rose and approached his eldest son. For a moment he stood before the boy, seemingly at a loss. Then, with visible effort, he placed a hand on James's shoulder. Your mother would have been very proud, he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. As am I. The simple words transformed James's face, years of hurt momentarily washed away by his father's approval. The other children watched in amazement, hope kindling in their eyes. The spell was broken by the entrance of Hawkins, the butler, who bowed apologetically. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, but Lady Victoria Blackwood has arrived and awaits you in the drawing-room." Alexander's expression immediately closed, the momentary softness replaced by his customary reserve. "Then, form Lady Victoria, I shall join her shortly." As the butler withdrew, Augusta noticed the change that had come over the children. The twins exchanged knowing glances, Catherine's smile faded, and James's posture once again became rigid and defensive. "Who is Lady Victoria?" Augusta asked quietly as the children began to disperse. It was Catherine who answered, her young face uncharacteristically solemn. "Father's cousin. She wants to marry him and become our new mother." "She visits often," Frederick added with undisguised distaste, "always bringing gifts and telling father how dreadfully we need a woman's guidance." "Which we have now," George pointed out, glancing at Augusta with something approaching loyalty. "Not that she'll care." Augusta watched as Alexander excused himself, the brief connection with his children already fading as he prepared to meet his visitor. The children's reactions told her all she needed to know about Lady Victoria Blackwood, and a strange protectiveness surged within her, not merely for the children, but curiously for their father as well. Lady Victoria Blackwood was everything Augusta was not. Tall, elegantly slender, with golden hair arranged in the latest fashion, and a gown that spoke of considerable wealth, she dominated the drawing-room with her presence. As Augusta entered with the children for afternoon tea, a ritual Alexander had unexpectedly requested they join. She immediately felt the other woman's assessing gaze. "Ah, this must be the new governess," Lady Victoria remarked, her tone suggesting she found Augusta wanting. "How convenient that you found someone so quickly, Alexander." The Duke, seated stiffly beside his cousin, merely nodded. "Miss Blackwell has proven quite capable." Lady Victoria's smile did not reach her eyes. "I'm sure she has, though I maintain my offer to help you find someone more suitable remains open. My friend the Countess of Harrington recently engaged a French governess for her children. So refined, so accomplished." "Miss Blackwell speaks French quite fluently," Catherine piped up unexpectedly. "And German too. She's teaching us both." Lady Victoria's smile tightened fractionally. "How charming. Tell me, Miss Blackwell, where did you receive your education?" Augusta met the woman's gaze steadily. "I was fortunate to be educated at Mrs. Fielding's Academy for Young Ladies in Bath, Lady Victoria. Later I served as a teacher's assistant there before accepting my first position as governess." "Mrs. Fielding's," Lady Victoria repeated, as though the name left a sour taste in her mouth. "I don't believe I'm familiar with the establishment." "It is small but excellent," Augusta replied evenly. "We focused on substance rather than reputation." A flash of amusement crossed Alexander's face so quickly, Augusta thought she might have imagined it. "Well," Lady Victoria continued, turning her attention to the children, "I've brought presents for you all, some educational materials I thought might supplement your studies." The gifts proved to be expensive but coldly impersonal, books too advanced for their intended recipients, a globe with inscriptions too small for Catherine to read without squinting, a porcelain doll for Eleanor that was clearly meant for display rather than play. Lady Victoria handed over the last of the gifts with a satisfied expression, as if awaiting approval for her generous gesture. "Alexander, Hawkins has already prepared my rooms, as we discussed. I shall stay through the weekend." Alexander did not respond immediately, merely lifting his glass to his lips. "What do you say, children?" Alexander prompted, when the last gift had been unwrapped. 5 dutiful thank yous followed, though Augusta noted the lack of enthusiasm behind them. "I've had the most splendid idea," Lady Victoria announced, setting down her teacup with a decisive clink. "The season is about to begin, Alexander. You've secluded yourself at Blackwood far too long. I insist you return to London with me. The Harringtons are hosting a ball next week that everyone of consequence will attend." Alexander frowned. "I have estate matters that require my attention." "Surely your steward can manage for a few weeks," Lady Victoria persisted, laying a gloved hand on his arm. "The children will be perfectly fine with their governess." Her gaze flickered dismissively over Augusta. "And it's high time you resumed your place in society. 3 years of mourning is more than sufficient, even for a duchess." Augusta saw James's knuckles whiten around his teacup, saw the hurt that flashed across the twins' faces, at the casual dismissal of their mother's memory. "What do you think, Miss Blackwell?" Alexander asked unexpectedly, turning to Augusta. "Would the children's education suffer in my absence?" The question caught her off guard. That he would seek her opinion in front of Lady Victoria suggested either a genuine concern for his children's welfare or a desire to use Augusta as a shield against his cousin's persuasion. Perhaps both. "The children's routine would continue uninterrupted, Your Grace," Augusta replied carefully. "However, I believe they have benefited greatly from your increased presence these past days." Lady Victoria made a sound that in less refined company might have been called a snort. "Really, Alexander? Consulting the governess on such matters? Next, you'll be asking the gardener's opinion on your investments." "Miss Blackwell spends more time with my children than anyone," Alexander replied, a note of steel entering his voice. "Her observations have proven valuable." A flush of anger colored Lady Victoria's perfect complexion. "I see I've come at an inopportune time," she said, rising gracefully from her seat. "Perhaps we might discuss this further in private, Alexander." The Duke hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Children, you are excused. Miss Blackwell, please continue with their afternoon lessons." As Augusta led the children from the drawing-room, she felt Lady Victoria's cold gaze following her. The woman was clearly a formidable adversary, wealthy, well-connected, and determined to secure her position by becoming the next Duchess of Westmoreland. Augusta had no illusions about her own standing. As a mere governess, she was little more than a servant in the eyes of society, regardless of the growing connection she felt with the Cavendish family. "Lady Victoria despises you," Frederick remarked matter-of-factly as they climbed the stairs to the schoolroom. "She thinks you're an obstacle." "Frederick," James hissed, casting an apologetic glance at Augusta. "Well, it's true," George chimed in. "She's been trying to convince Father to send us all to boarding school for ages. Now that Miss Blackwell is here, and Father is actually speaking to us again, Lady Victoria must be absolutely seething." Augusta maintained her composure, though the children's observations unsettled her. "Lady Victoria naturally has concerns about your welfare," she said diplomatically. "As your father's cousin, she—" "Second cousin," Catherine corrected with surprising vehemence. "And she didn't care about us until Mother died, and she decided she wanted to be a duchess." Augusta guided them into the schoolroom, troubled by the undercurrents she was discovering in the Cavendish household. "Regardless of Lady Victoria's motives, it's important that we conduct ourselves with dignity and respect. Now let us return to our geography lesson." As the children settled reluctantly into their studies, Augusta found her thoughts returning to the drawing-room below, where Alexander was now alone with his cousin. The vulnerability she had glimpsed in him during the children's performance had been replaced once more by his customary reserve in Lady Victoria's presence. Yet he had sought Augusta's opinion, had valued her assessment of his children's needs above his cousin's persuasions. It was a small victory, but significant nonetheless. That evening, long after the children had been settled for the night and Lady Victoria had departed, with a promise to return the following week, Augusta found herself unable to sleep. The events of the day had left her mind restless, her thoughts circling around the complex dynamics of the Cavendish family and her own increasingly complicated feelings toward them, especially their father. Deciding that a book might help calm her thoughts, Augusta wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and quietly made her way to the library. The corridors of Blackwood Manor were silent, the grand house creaking and settling in the cool spring night. To her surprise, a soft glow emanated from beneath the library door. Someone else, it seemed, was also seeking solace in literature at this late hour. Augusta hesitated, about to retreat to her room, when the door suddenly opened. Alexander Cavendish stood in the doorway, his tall figure silhouetted against the lamplight behind him. He had removed his coat and cravat, and the top buttons of his shirt were undone, revealing a glimpse of his throat. His hair, usually impeccably styled, was slightly disheveled as though he had repeatedly run his hands through it. "Miss Blackwell," he said, clearly as startled to see her as she was to encounter him. "Your Grace," Augusta replied, acutely aware of her inappropriate attire. Though her nightdress was modest and fully covered by her shawl, the situation was decidedly improper. "Forgive me, I did not mean to disturb you. I was having difficulty sleeping and thought a book might help." Alexander studied her for a moment, then stepped aside. "By all means, the library is at your disposal." Augusta hesitated, caught between propriety and the unexpected opportunity to speak with the Duke alone, without the barriers of formal interaction. "Unless you fear ruination by being alone with me in the middle of the night," Alexander added, with a flash of unexpected humor in his eyes. "I think my reputation can withstand it, Your Grace," Augusta replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "Though Mrs. Wilson might have strong opinions on the matter." A ghost of a smile touched Alexander's lips as he gestured for her to enter. "Mrs. Wilson has strong opinions on everything. It's her most consistent quality." The library was warm, a small fire still burning in the grate. An open book and half-empty glass of brandy on the side table indicated where Alexander had been sitting. As Augusta moved toward the shelves, searching for something to justify her presence, she felt his eyes upon her. "You handled Victoria admirably today," he said abruptly. Augusta turned, surprised by the comment. "Lady Victoria is formidable. A diplomatic assessment." Alexander picked up his brandy glass, swirling the amber liquid thoughtfully. "She was displeased by your presence, you know. Victoria has been campaigning to place her own choice of governess in this household for some time." "I gathered as much," Augusta admitted. "The children seem wary of her intentions." Alexander's expression darkened. "Children often perceive what adults choose to ignore." Augusta selected a volume of poetry from the shelf, running her fingers over the leather binding. "May I ask you something, Your Grace?" He gestured for her to continue, his face inscrutable in the flickering light. "The children believe Lady Victoria wishes to become the next Duchess of Westmoreland. Is that a prospect you favour?" The bluntness of her question clearly startled him. For a moment, Augusta feared she had overstepped dramatically, but Alexander's response, when it came, was measured rather than angry. "Victoria is suitable in every way that society deems important," he said carefully. "She is well-born, well-connected, and would provide the children with a mother figure of appropriate standing. Those are reasons society might approve of such a match," Augusta observed quietly. "Not reasons why you might desire it." Alexander looked at her sharply. "You speak very freely, Miss Blackwell. Forgive me, Your Grace, it is not my place to question your personal affairs." He set down his glass with deliberate care. "And yet you just did." After a pause, he added, "No, I do not favour the prospect, despite the apparent suitability. Victoria sees the title, the estates, the position, not the man. Nor, I suspect, does she truly see the children as anything but accessories to the role she covets." The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than any statement Alexander had made in Augusta's presence. She chose her next words with care. "The children flourished today when you attended their performance. They hunger for your approval, your presence in their lives." A shadow crossed Alexander's face. "I am not the father they deserve." "You could be," Augusta replied simply. Their eyes met across the room, and Augusta felt something shift between them. A moment of connection that transcended their respective positions, that acknowledged the growing understanding that had developed over these past weeks. "Why did you become a governess, Miss Blackwell?" Alexander asked suddenly. "You are clearly educated beyond the requirements of the position and possess an uncommon intelligence. Surely other paths were available to you." Augusta hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Necessity initially. After my parents died, I had few options as a woman without fortune or connection, but I discovered I had a genuine gift for teaching, for helping children find their strengths and overcome their weaknesses." "And what of your own life? Do governesses not dream of homes and families of their own?" The personal nature of the question should have offended her, but Augusta found herself answering truthfully. "Of course. But circumstances have a way of redirecting our dreams. I've made peace with my path." Alexander stepped closer, close enough that Augusta could detect the faint scent of brandy on his breath, the subtle fragrance of his shaving soap. "Have you? Made peace with it?" Her heart quickened traitorously. Most days. Something in his expression softened, and for a breathless moment Augusta thought he might reach for her. Instead, he stepped back, restoring the proper distance between them. "It's late," he said, his voice once again the controlled tone of the Duke rather than the man. "You should return to your room, Miss Blackwell." Augusta clutched her forgotten book to her chest and nodded. "Good night, Your Grace." As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Augusta." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Thank you," he said simply, "for what you've done for my children." She offered him a small smile. "They make it easy to care for them, Your Grace." "Alexander," he corrected quietly, "when we are alone, I would prefer you call me Alexander." The invitation represented a crossing of boundaries that could not be undone. Augusta knew she should decline, should maintain the formal distance that propriety demanded between a duke and his children's governess. Instead, she found herself nodding. "Good night, Alexander," she said softly, and slipped from the library before she could witness his reaction. As Augusta made her way back to her room, her heart pounding with emotions she dared not name, she was unaware of the figure watching from the shadows of the corridor. Lady Victoria's lady's maid, who had remained at Blackwood Manor overnight to prepare her mistress's rooms for her return visit, had observed the entire exchange and would waste no time in reporting it to her employer. The weeks that followed brought subtle but significant changes to Blackwood Manor. The children's lessons expanded beyond the schoolroom to include nature walks on the estate grounds, where Augusta taught them to identify local flora and fauna. The library became a regular gathering place in the evenings, with readings and discussions that increasingly included their father. Even the gardens, long neglected, began to show signs of renewal, as Alexander instructed the groundskeeper to restore Caroline's beloved rose beds. Most remarkable of all was the gradual transformation in Alexander himself. The ice that had encased him for 3 years was thawing, revealing glimpses of the man he had once been, intelligent, thoughtful, possessed of a dry wit that emerged with increasing frequency in Augusta's company. The children flourished under the combined attention of their father and governess. James abandoned his defensive posture and began to assume the responsibilities of his position as heir with genuine interest rather than resentful duty. The twins channeled their energies into complementary pursuits that showcased their individual talents. Catherine's artistic abilities blossomed under Augusta's encouragement, and even little Eleanor began to speak in complete sentences, her natural vivacity emerging from the shell of shyness that had previously contained it. For Augusta, these changes brought both joy and trepidation. Joy at witnessing the healing of this wounded family, trepidation at the realization that her own heart was increasingly entangled with them all, especially their father. The moments alone with Alexander had grown more frequent. Discussions about the children's progress that extended into wider conversations about literature, philosophy, politics, accidental encounters in the library or gardens that no longer seemed entirely accidental, a growing ease between them that defied the boundaries of their respective positions. "You should join us for dinner this evening," Alexander said one afternoon as they watched the children engaged in a spirited game of cricket on the lawn. "Not as the children's governess, but as my guest." Augusta turned to him in surprise. Such an invitation represented a significant departure from the established order of the household. "That would be most irregular, Your Grace. Alexander," she corrected, still unaccustomed to using his given name despite his continued insistence when they were alone. "Perhaps," he acknowledged, his eyes not leaving her face, "but I find I increasingly prefer your company to dining alone." The simple admission sent warmth spreading through Augusta's chest. "The servants will talk." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "The servants already talk, Mrs. Wilson has been giving me disapproving looks for weeks." Augusta couldn't help but laugh softly. "She cornered me yesterday to remind me of the appropriate boundaries between staff and family." "And what did you tell her?" "That I was fully aware of my position and responsibilities." Augusta hesitated, then added quietly, "Though I find those boundaries increasingly difficult to maintain." Alexander's gaze intensified. "As do I." The moment was interrupted by a shout from the cricket pitch as George successfully bowled out Frederick, prompting good-natured argument between the twins. Alexander's attention returned to his children, but not before his hand briefly, perhaps accidentally, brushed against Augusta's, a fleeting touch that nevertheless left her skin tingling. "So you'll join me for dinner?" he asked, as though the brief interlude of honesty had not occurred. Augusta knew she should refuse. Every instinct of self-preservation warned her that to accept would be to acknowledge the shifting nature of their relationship, to take a step from which there might be no retreat. Yet she found herself nodding. "I'd be honored," she said softly. The smile that transformed Alexander's face, genuine, unguarded, almost boyish in its pleasure, made her heart skip traitorously. Little did either of them suspect that this small happiness would soon be threatened by the storm gathering on their horizon as Lady Victoria's planned return to Blackwood Manor approached, this time armed with information that could destroy everything Augusta had helped to build. The evening of Augusta's dinner with Alexander arrived with unexpected complications. A letter had come that afternoon from Lady Victoria announcing her intention to arrive the following day with an esteemed guest she was eager for Alexander to meet. The news had cast a shadow over what should have been a pleasant occasion, though Alexander had insisted the dinner proceed as planned. Augusta had agonized over her appearance, acutely aware of the inadequacies of her wardrobe. The best of her 3 gowns was a deep green silk, several seasons out of fashion, but well made and flattering to her coloring. She had twisted her dark hair into a simple but elegant arrangement, adorned with a single pearl hairpin, a gift from her mother and one of the few pieces of jewelry she possessed. As she made her way to the small family dining room, where Alexander had arranged for them to dine privately, Augusta fought to calm her nerves. This was folly, she knew, a brief pretense at equality that could not last. Tomorrow Lady Victoria would return, and Augusta would resume her proper place in the household hierarchy. Yet she could not bring herself to decline this one evening of what might have been under different circumstances. Alexander was waiting for her, standing before the fireplace with a glass of wine in hand. He turned as she entered, and the appreciation in his gaze as it travelled over her made Augusta's cheeks warm. "You look beautiful," he said simply, crossing to pour her a glass of wine. "Thank you," she replied, accepting the glass with only a slight tremor in her hand. "Though I fear my best hardly compares to what you must be accustomed to in London society." Alexander's expression grew serious. "You compare favourably to anyone I've encountered in any society, Augusta. Your beauty lies not merely in your appearance, though that is certainly worthy of admiration, but in your intelligence, your compassion, your strength of character." The compliment, delivered with such sincerity, left Augusta momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, Hawkins entered to announce that dinner was served. The meal was simple by ducal standards, but exquisitely prepared. Clear soup, roasted pheasant, spring vegetables from the kitchen gardens, and a delicate lemon tart that Augusta recognized as her favorite from previous meals with the children. The thoughtfulness of the selection was not lost on her. Their conversation flowed easily, ranging from the children's progress to books they had both enjoyed, to Augusta's childhood in Somerset and Alexander's time at Oxford. It was only when the dessert plates had been cleared and they were alone again that the subject of Lady Victoria's imminent arrival arose. "I wonder who this esteemed guest might be," Augusta remarked, sipping the excellent dessert wine Alexander had selected. A shadow crossed his face. "Knowing Victoria, likely some eligible bachelor she hopes will catch your attention and remove you from Blackwood Manor." Augusta raised an eyebrow. "You think she views me as a threat? I think Victoria is perceptive enough to recognize the influence you've had on both the children and myself," Alexander replied, his gaze direct. "An influence she finds inconvenient to her plans." Augusta set down her glass carefully. "And what of your plans, Alexander? Lady Victoria clearly expects you to eventually remarry. The children need a mother. Society expects it. And you are still young. The children have you," he said quietly. The simple statement hung in the air between them, pregnant with implications neither had yet dared to voice aloud. "I am their governess," Augusta reminded him gently. "A position that is by its nature temporary." Alexander's expression grew intent. "Does it need to be?" Augusta's heart began to race. "What are you asking?" He rose from his chair and came to stand beside her, taking her hand in his. "I'm asking if you might consider a more permanent position at Blackwood Manor. Not as governess, but as—" A sudden commotion in the entrance hall interrupted his words. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, the sound of doors opening and closing. Moments later, Hawkins appeared, his usual composure noticeably disturbed. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but Lady Victoria has arrived unexpectedly with her guest. They are in the drawing room and insist upon seeing you immediately." Alexander frowned. "They were not expected until tomorrow." "Yes, Your Grace." "I informed her ladyship of this, but she was most insistent. Augusta withdrew her hand from Alexander's, reality crashing back upon the fragile moment they had been sharing. "I should return to my room." "No," Alexander's voice was firm. "Whatever Victoria's game is, I would prefer to face it with you beside me." The certainty in his tone gave Augusta courage. She nodded, rising to stand beside him. As they entered the drawing room, Augusta immediately sensed the hostility emanating from Lady Victoria, who stood near the fireplace in a travelling costume that somehow managed to look both practical and fashionable. Beside her was a middle-aged man Augusta did not recognize, elegantly dressed and regarding her with open curiosity. "Alexander," Lady Victoria greeted coldly, her gaze flickering dismissively over Augusta. "I apologize for the late hour, but when Mr. Sinclair informed me of his business with you, I felt it could not wait until morning." Alexander's expression remained neutral, though Augusta sensed his tension. "Lady Victoria, Mr. Sinclair, may I present Miss Augusta Blackwell, governess to my children?" "We are well aware of who Miss Blackwell is," Lady Victoria replied with a thin smile, "or perhaps I should say, who she claims to be." Augusta felt a chill run down her spine. "I don't understand," Alexander said, his voice dangerously quiet. Mr. Sinclair stepped forward, his manner professional but his eyes calculating. "Your Grace, I am a private investigator engaged by Lady Victoria to look into Miss Blackwell's background. My findings are concerning." Alexander's posture stiffened. "You investigated a member of my household without my knowledge or consent?" "I acted out of concern for you and the children," Lady Victoria interjected smoothly. "And my concerns appear to have been justified. Mr. Sinclair, please share what you've discovered." The investigator pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "Miss Augusta Blackwell claims to have been educated at Mrs. Fielding's Academy for Young Ladies in Bath. The establishment exists, but has no record of a student by that name. She claims to have been orphaned and separated from her brother, a convenient story that proves difficult to verify." Augusta's hands began to tremble. "I can explain." "There's more," Mr. Sinclair continued, ignoring her. "Miss Blackwell's previous employment references are suspect. The family she claims to have served before coming here, the Harringtons of Devon, report that their governess was dismissed for inappropriate behavior with the master of the house." "That's not true," Augusta exclaimed, her composure finally breaking. "I never—" "Of course you would deny it," Lady Victoria said coldly. "Just as you've been lying about your qualifications, your background, your very identity. One wonders what your true purpose might be in insinuating yourself into the Duke's household, and his confidence." Alexander had gone very still, his face a mask that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Is there any truth to these accusations, Augusta?" The use of her given name before others did not go unnoticed by Lady Victoria, whose eyes narrowed speculatively. Augusta took a deep breath, fighting for composure. "There is both truth and falsehood in what Mr. Sinclair has reported. If you will allow me to explain—" "I think we've heard quite enough," Lady Victoria interrupted. "Alexander, I strongly advise you to dismiss this person immediately. The children cannot be left in the care of someone who has so thoroughly misrepresented herself." Augusta looked desperately at Alexander, whose expression remained unreadable. "Please," she said quietly, "at least hear my explanation in private before you judge me." After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Alexander nodded curtly. "Lady Victoria, Mr. Sinclair, you must be tired from your journey. Hawkins will show you to your rooms. We will discuss this matter further in the morning." Lady Victoria's face flushed with anger. "You cannot possibly be considering—" "I said, we will discuss this in the morning," Alexander repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "For now, I wish to speak with Miss Blackwell alone." Once they were alone in Alexander's study, Augusta found herself unable to meet his gaze. The warmth and connection they had shared at dinner seemed a distant memory, replaced by a chasm of doubt and suspicion. "Explain," Alexander said simply, his voice neither accusatory nor forgiving. Augusta gathered her courage and began. "My name is not Augusta Blackwell. It is Augusta Winters. I changed it after leaving my position with the Harringtons, not because I was dismissed for impropriety, but because Lord Harrington's unwanted advances made my position untenable." She saw Alexander's expression shift slightly, but continued before he could speak. When I refused him, he threatened to ruin my reputation, to ensure I would never find employment as a governess again. I fled in the night with only what I could carry. I knew no one would accept my word against his, so I created a new identity. I could not use my real references, so I fabricated new ones. "And your education?" Alexander asked quietly. "I was educated at Mrs. Fielding's, but under my real name. My parents did die, as I described, and my brother and I were separated. Everything I told you about my life was true except for my surname." Augusta finally looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "I never intended to deceive you, Alexander. I only wanted to secure honest employment, to use my skills to support myself with dignity. Why did you not tell me this when I hired you? Would you have employed me if you knew? A governess with no verifiable references, who had fled her previous position under a cloud of scandal, however unjust." Augusta shook her head. "I had been turned away from 3 households before I saw your advertisement. I was desperate, and your children needed me." Alexander was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "The children do need you," he finally said. "They have flourished under your care in ways I scarcely thought possible." Hope flickered in Augusta's chest, but Alexander's next words extinguished it. "But I cannot have someone in my household responsible for my children who has built her position on falsehoods." His voice was gentle but firm. "Regardless of the circumstances that drove you to it." "I understand," Augusta whispered, fighting back tears. "I will pack my things immediately." "No," Alexander sighed heavily. "It is late, and you are upset. Stay the night. We will discuss arrangements for your departure in the morning." Augusta nodded, unable to trust her voice. As she turned to leave, Alexander spoke again. "For what it's worth, Augusta, I believe your explanation, and I am sorry for what you endured at the Harringtons." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her composure entirely. With a last anguished glance at the man who had come to mean so much to her, Augusta fled the study, her vision blurred by unshed tears. In her room, as she began to pack her few possessions, a soft knock at the door startled her. Hastily wiping her eyes, Augusta opened it to find Catherine standing in her nightdress, her young face troubled. "Miss Blackwell, why are you crying, and why are you putting your things in your trunk?" Augusta tried to smile reassuringly. "It's nothing for you to worry about, dear. Go back to bed." Catherine's eyes widened in understanding. "You're leaving us, aren't you? Because of Lady Victoria?" Before Augusta could respond, James appeared in the corridor, followed quickly by the twins. Clearly the children had been conferring about the unexpected late-night arrival. "What's happening?" James demanded, his voice cracking with emotion. "We heard raised voices downstairs." Augusta hesitated, torn between honesty and protecting the children from adult concerns. "There has been a misunderstanding about my past. Your father and I have discussed it, and we feel it would be best if I seek employment elsewhere." "No," Catherine cried, flinging her arms around Augusta's waist. "You can't leave. Father is happy again because of you. We're all happy." The twins looked equally distressed, and even James, who tried so hard to maintain his dignity, appeared on the verge of tears. "She's trying to get rid of you so she can marry Father and send us all to boarding school," George said with unexpected insight. "We heard her talking about it with her lady's maid." "You're the only one who's made things better since Mother died," Frederick added quietly. "Father smiles now. He talks to us. He even laughed yesterday when we were playing cricket." Augusta felt her heart breaking anew. "I'm so sorry, children. Truly I am. But your father has made his decision, and we must respect it." "No, we don't," James said suddenly, a spark of his father's determination flaring in his eyes. "Not if it's the wrong decision." Before Augusta could stop him, James turned and ran down the corridor, the other children following close behind. Augusta hurried after them, her heart racing with apprehension. She found them outside Alexander's study, James pounding on the door with surprising force for a 12-year-old. "Father, Father, you have to come out. It's important." The door opened to reveal Alexander, his cravat loosened and a glass of brandy in his hand. He looked from his eldest son to the assembled children, and finally to Augusta, hovering anxiously behind them. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked, though without real anger. "You can't send Miss Blackwell away," Catherine declared, her small face flushed with emotion. "We need her. You need her. Alexander's expression softened as he regarded his youngest daughter. "Catherine, there are matters involved that you don't understand." "We understand that you're making a mistake," James said boldly. "Miss Blackwell has been the best thing to happen to this family since—" His voice faltered. "Since Mother died." The twins nodded vigorously in agreement, and even little Eleanor, who had apparently been awakened by the commotion and carried downstairs by Mrs. Pembroke, reached out her arms to Augusta with a plaintive, "Stay." Alexander looked at his children, really looked at them, and something in his expression shifted. He glanced past them to Augusta, who stood with tears streaming unchecked down her face. "Children," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm, "return to your beds. Miss Blackwell and I have much to discuss, and it is far too late for you to be wandering the corridors." "But father," James began. "I promise I will consider everything you've said," Alexander interrupted. "Now to bed with all of you. Mrs. Pembroke, please see that they're settled." The nursemaid nodded, gathering Eleanor more securely in her arms and herding the reluctant older children back toward the nursery wing. As they departed, James cast one last, imploring look at his father. When they were alone, Alexander gestured for Augusta to enter his study. She did so with trepidation, unsure what this unexpected development might mean. "It seems my children have staged a rebellion on your behalf," he said, closing the door behind them. Augusta managed a watery smile. "They are remarkably determined when united in a cause." "Like their mother," Alexander said softly, a note of old pain in his voice. Then, more firmly, "And their governess." He crossed to stand before her, close enough that Augusta could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, the fine lines at their corners that had lightened since her arrival at Blackwood Manor. "I have been a fool," Alexander said quietly, "allowing Victoria's machinations and society's expectations to cloud my judgment." Augusta's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the children are right. You have been the best thing to happen to this family in 3 years. He took her hands in his touch warm and steady. "You brought light back into our lives, Augusta. You helped me remember how to be a father to my children, how to find joy in their presence rather than only pain at the memory of what was lost." "Alexander," Augusta whispered, hardly daring to hope. "I was about to ask you something at dinner before we were interrupted," he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "Something that had nothing to do with your position as governess, and everything to do with the woman you are, regardless of your name." With a grace that belied his imposing stature, Alexander knelt before her, still holding her hands in his. "I love you, Augusta Winters, not for your accomplishments or your background or anything but the essence of who you are. I love your kindness, your intelligence, your courage in the face of adversity. I love the way you have healed my family and my heart." Tears spilled freely down Augusta's cheeks now, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I am asking you to stay at Blackwood Manor, not as governess to my children, but as my wife, as their mother. Will you do me the very great honor of becoming the Duchess of Westmoreland?" For a moment, Augusta could not speak, overwhelmed by emotions too powerful for words. Then, with a radiant smile breaking through her tears, she nodded. "Yes," she managed finally. "Yes, with all my heart." Alexander rose to his feet and drew her into his arms, sealing their betrothal with a kiss that spoke of passion long denied, of promises kept, and new beginnings. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Victoria will be apoplectic," he murmured, a hint of mischief in his tone. Augusta laughed softly. "The scandal will be considerable. A duke marrying his children's governess of questionable background. Let them talk," Alexander said firmly. "I lost 3 years of happiness to grief and convention. I will not sacrifice one more day." As if summoned by their thoughts, a sharp knock sounded at the study door. Before Alexander could respond, it opened to reveal Lady Victoria, her face a mask of outrage as she took in the scene before her, the Duke of Westmoreland standing with his arms around the disgraced governess. "Alexander, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shrill with disbelief. Alexander did not release Augusta, but turned to face his cousin with newfound resolution. "The meaning, Victoria, is that I have asked Miss Winters to become my wife, and she has done me the honor of accepting." Lady Victoria's face drained of color. "You cannot be serious. She is a nobody, a liar who has manipulated her way into your household and your affections. She is the woman I love, Alexander replied simply, and she will be the Duchess of Westmoreland. I will see you both ruined, Lady Victoria hissed. When society hears of this, they will hear of a duke who found love and happiness after tragedy, Alexander interrupted, his voice hardening. They will hear of a woman of exceptional character who brought healing to a broken family. And should anyone speak ill of my future wife, they will find themselves unwelcome in any home or establishment under my influence, which, as you well know, is considerable. Lady Victoria stood trembling with fury, but even she could not miss the implacable determination in Alexander's stance, the protective way he held Augusta close. You will regret this, she said finally, before turning on her heel and storming from the room. I believe that's my cue to depart as well, came a voice from the doorway. Mr. Sinclair stood there regarding the couple with what appeared to be genuine amusement. Congratulations, Your Grace, Miss Winters. For what it's worth, I told Lady Victoria that her plan was ill-conceived. Love is rarely defeated by such petty machinations. With a respectful nod, the investigator withdrew, closing the door softly behind him. Augusta looked up at Alexander in amazement. Did that just happen? It did, he confirmed with a smile, and there is more to come. Tomorrow we will tell the children. Then we must make arrangements for a wedding. Nothing elaborate, but befitting your future position. And after that? After that? Augusta prompted, her heart full to overflowing. After that, my love, we begin our life together. Not as duke and governess, but as husband and wife, as father and mother to 5 extraordinary children, as partners in whatever joys and challenges the future may hold. As Alexander lowered his lips to hers once more, Augusta knew with absolute certainty that the walls around his heart had crumbled completely, and that the spring had truly returned to Blackwood Manor at last. The gardens of Blackwood Manor blazed with summer colour, roses climbing trellises and honeysuckle scenting the air with its sweet perfume. On the expansive lawn, Alexander Cavendish, Duke of Westmoreland, sat contentedly on a blanket spread beneath an ancient oak tree, watching as his wife of 3 months engaged in an animated game of badminton with the twins. Augusta's laughter rang out as Frederick executed a particularly dramatic dive to return her serve, while George cheered his brother on with characteristic enthusiasm. Her dark hair was coming loose from its pins, and her cheeks were flushed with exertion and happiness. "Father, look at what I've drawn," Catherine exclaimed, presenting Alexander with her latest artistic creation, a remarkably skilled portrait of the family gathered around the pianoforte. "This is extraordinary, Catherine," Alexander replied with genuine admiration. "You've captured everyone perfectly." The little girl beamed with pride. "Miss Reynolds says I have a natural gift. She thinks I might study art in London someday." Alexander smiled at the mention of the new governess, a competent, kind-hearted woman Augusta had personally selected to continue the children's education now that she had assumed the role of Duchess and mother. "If that is what you wish, then it shall be so," he assured his daughter, "though London will have to wait a few more years, I'm afraid." Nearby, James sat with Eleanor, patiently helping his youngest sister construct a daisy chain. The transformation in his eldest son continued to amaze Alexander. Gone was the defensive, angry boy of a year ago, replaced by a young man growing daily in confidence and compassion. "Your Grace," Hawkins approached with a silver tray bearing correspondence. "The post has arrived." Alexander accepted the letters with a nod of thanks, quickly sorting through them until he found what he sought, a letter bearing the seal of Oxford University. "James," he called, "come see what's arrived." The boy hurried over, his expression curious. When Alexander handed him the letter, his eyes widened. "Is this—" "Open it and see," Alexander encouraged. With trembling fingers, James broke the seal and unfolded the document. As he read, his face lit with joy. "I've been accepted to visit. They're considering me for early admission to the preparatory program." "Of course they are," Alexander said warmly, clasping his son's shoulder. "You've worked incredibly hard this past year. Your mother would be so proud." At the mention of Caroline, a shadow of old grief passed between them, but it was briefer now, tempered by healing and the new happiness they had found. "Augusta will be thrilled," James said, glancing toward his stepmother with genuine affection. "She's been helping me with my Latin composition for months." As if sensing their attention, Augusta looked up from the badminton game and waved, then excused herself from the twins to join her husband and stepchildren beneath the oak tree. "What has you both looking so pleased?" she asked, settling gracefully beside Alexander on the blanket. "James has received word from Oxford," Alexander explained, his voice rich with pride. "They are considering him for early admission to their preparatory program." Augusta's face lit with delight. "James, that's wonderful, though I confess I'm not surprised. Your essay on Roman governance was exceptional." The boy flushed with pleasure at her praise. "I couldn't have done it without your help." "Nonsense," Augusta replied, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "The talent and determination were entirely your own. I merely provided guidance." Alexander watched the interaction with a full heart. In the 4 months since Augusta had agreed to become his wife, he had witnessed countless such moments, small kindnesses, mutual respect, genuine affection growing between his children and the woman who had so unexpectedly become central to all their lives. Their wedding had been a modest affair by ducal standards, a quiet ceremony in the village church, attended by local gentry and a few carefully selected friends from London. Lady Victoria had been conspicuously absent, though Alexander had received reports that she had departed for an extended tour of the continent shortly after the engagement was announced. Society had indeed buzzed with the scandal of a duke marrying his children's governess, but Alexander had been true to his word. Those who dared speak ill of Augusta quickly found themselves excluded from the most desirable invitations and connections. More importantly, those who actually met the new Duchess of Westmoreland invariably came away charmed by her intelligence, dignity, and genuine warmth. "Papa, flower for you," Eleanor announced, toddling over to present Alexander with a slightly crushed dandelion. "Thank you, my darling," he replied solemnly, accepting the gift as if it were the rarest of treasures. "It's beautiful." Eleanor climbed into his lap without hesitation, a gesture that still sometimes caught Alexander by surprise. For so long, he had held himself apart from his youngest child, unable to face the living reminder of his greatest loss. Now, with Augusta's gentle guidance, he had discovered the joy of knowing this vibrant little person who, while bearing her mother's features, was uniquely herself. "Story time?" Eleanor asked hopefully, looking from Alexander to Augusta. "I believe that can be arranged," Augusta replied with a smile. "Shall we gather everyone?" Soon the entire family was assembled beneath the oak tree, James and Catherine, the twins sprawled on the grass, Eleanor nestled between Alexander and Augusta. As Augusta began to weave a tale of adventure and discovery, Alexander found himself studying her profile, still sometimes amazed that this extraordinary woman had chosen to share her life with him and his children. Their eyes met over Eleanor's head, and the love he saw reflected there filled him with a contentment he had once thought lost forever. Augusta's hand found his on the blanket, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Alexander Cavendish, once known throughout England as the Duke with a heart of stone, had rediscovered what it meant to love and be loved. Through the healing power of Augusta's unwavering spirit, the walls around his heart had crumbled, allowing him not only to embrace the present, but to honor the past without being imprisoned by it. As the summer breeze carried the scent of roses through the gardens of Blackwood Manor, Alexander silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought Augusta Winters to his door that spring day. She had been hired only to care for his children, but in the end, her love had saved them all. The end. Dear listener, you've walked through storms, faced heartaches, loved deeply and lost bravely, and still here you are, strong, standing, radiant in the quiet power that only time can give. This story, with its twists and healing, may have reminded you of parts of your own journey, of second chances, of letting love in again, of the beauty that lives not in perfection, but in perseverance. You are not defined by the years behind you, but by the wisdom you've earned, the laughter you've shared, the lives you've touched. Your age is not a limit, it's a crown, and the lines on your face are simply maps of all the places your heart has traveled. Tonight, let this story settle in your spirit like a lullaby. Let it remind you how remarkable you are, how much strength, grace, and quiet beauty you carry. May you rest knowing you are worthy, you are seen, and you are loved, not in spite of your years, but because of them. Sleep peacefully. You are a light in this world, with deep affection. Legends of the Fall Team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story moved your heart, we ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a kind comment, like the video, and share it with someone you love. Your support keeps us inspired and motivated to create more stories filled with love, healing, and breathtaking turns of fate. At the end of this video, another story suggestion will appear. Click on it and be surprised by more emotional tales just like this one.